what's up, sir? Welcome back to another video. So for about a decade now, EVH has been on my bucket list of tube amps to try, specifically the Stealth. I have heard so much about these amps. I've seen bands tour with them, a bunch of my friends play them, and as a metal guy and novice tube amp aficionado, it has been a mark of shame on my record that I hadn't even plugged into one of these. And by one of these, I don't just mean a Stealth, I mean any EVH amp. But a couple of weeks ago, that changed. A decade of hype culminated in this showing up at my studio, or my basement, den, whatever, we move. So, does it still hold up to the hype in today's modern high-gain landscape? Smack a like on the video if you're going to enjoy it. That actually really helps out, and let's take a closer look. So there are very few amp families that invoke the kind of respect in rock and metal as the 5150 series. And even if you've grown up in the digital age of guitar tone, you probably still know the legendary story. The original 5150 was developed by PV for Eddie Van Halen because he demanded an outrageous amount of gain that nothing else at the time could provide. They followed it up with the 5152, a couple of tweaks, most notably adding separate EQ to each channel. And when Eddie joined Fender to start EVH, it birthed the 5153. Now, the name sounds like a continuation, but it is a very different amp compared to its previous namesakes. What hasn't changed is the outrageous amount of gain that this thing has. Now, this is the Stealth 6L6 100-watt version. The difference between this and the original 5153 100-watt is that it's got even more gain. And it also has separate resonance controls for each channel. Love that. And it looks way cooler with the blacked out logo and blacked out pinstripes. Not even gonna lie, that was the reason I went with this one as my first EVH amp. It's surprisingly difficult to find a comprehensive comparison between the OG, the 6L6 Stealth, and the EL34 Stealth, and apparently even the 50 watts aren't always voiced the same as the 100 watts. The OG 100 watt doesn't have any resonance controls, whereas the 50 watt has a global resonance control, so even the features aren't the same. I don't know, it was overwhelming. I like gain. This was one of the big ones, and it looks the coolest. And I think I made a good choice because I've been using this on a few demos, and it sounds absolutely crushing. First thing I noticed about this amp is that the 100-watt 5150s have head shells that match the size of the tone. I mean, this thing is enormous. I don't know if you can see from the shot, but it's even slightly wider than my Mesa 2x12 cab. What the f? You know, I thought the Houston Kettner Tri-Amp was a big amp, but this beats it by about an inch. But because they've made it so wide, you've got separate EQ, gain, and volume controls for each channel, all laid out in a single line on the front panel. And unlike, say, Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier that uses metal dome knobs, this has big, visible chicken heads. It's not cramped, it's easy to see and adjust your settings even if you're in a dimly lit area like a stage. Super clean layout. I love that. To make it even more clean, even though it's super wide, they put the power and standby switches on the back. Like, this is literally one of the cleanest front panels I've seen on any amp. But so now I've played around with it for a couple of weeks. Here's the deal with the 5153 Stealth. You ready? I'm gonna tell you right now. The main feature of this amp is gain. This thing has so much freaking gain, it's ridiculous. And I can't believe I'm saying this as a metal guy, but the Stealth almost has too much gain. I know, just take my metal card right now. But this amp very quickly can get out of control. It's almost like at a certain point, it's just gain for gain's sake. And I kind of appreciate that attitude. And it's also like, well, with too much gain, you can dial it back. But if you don't have enough gain on tap, you'll have to add a boost pedal. It changes the voicing of the amp. Not enough gain is not something you'll struggle with the Stealth. That being said, when you've got this thing dialed in right, which is super easy, it's articulate, and it's also goddamn crushing. It's also smoother sounding, less gritty than my 6505 Plus. I would describe it as a more refined take on the 5150 sounds than what came before it. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, by the way. I love them both. The way that the mids sit, these things just cut through and sound absolutely brutal in a mix. What I'm saying is that there isn't too big a difference between a 6505 and a 6505 Plus, or 5150 and 5152, depending on what era you grew up in. The 5153 Stealth, though, totally different beast. I also really appreciate how it has a proper clean channel, courtesy of Fender, of course. Blue channel is where I've spent most of my time with this amp. It's so tight. It is a perfect modern metal tone. Like a metal scalpel. It's precise. It cuts through in a mix. It sounds almost like a pre-boosted lead channel. The red channel is my absolute favorite, though. It is so stupidly brutal. I'm talking brutal to the point where there are no more brain cells. The blue channel already has an outrageous amount of gain. Red has even more. It's supposed to be your lead channel, so it's thicker, it's chunkier. I'm not really a lead player, though. Used for rhythms, it of course doesn't cut through in a mix context nearly as much as the blue channel does. But, oh my god, if you're just around with chugs or with writing riffs, it's the best. And obviously, if you are a lead player, you're probably gonna have a good time with this, using it as it was intended. The Stealths have this weird quirk, though, and shout out to Dustin Nichols for pointing this out, but for some reason, the gain knob of the blue channel affects the gain level of the red channel. I don't know if this was a defect. I'm almost curious if this was intentional, since blue is supposed to be your rhythm and red is supposed to be your lead. So stick with me on this. Was it purposefully done so you've got the right amount of corresponding gain and saturation when it's time to go from rhythm to ripping a solo. Generally, I am not a fan at all when the controls of one channel affects the tone of another. Weirdly, it only affects the stealths. It doesn't happen on the OG, and actually it only affects the 100-watt stealths. It doesn't happen on the 50-watt versions either. But I'm going with my headcanon. That way this kind of actually makes sense, sort of. So let's wrap this up. Again, I cannot believe it's taken me this long to try one of these. It is so good. I mean, holy, there's a reason these things have the reputation that they do. The stealth is a high gain, literal behemoth of an amp. But that's kind of the thing with this. I said it earlier in the video, but there really is almost just too much gain. It's got great cleans, phenomenally beautiful, brutal high gain. It is definitely more versatile than a 6505, but I kind of wish it had more in the way of a middle ground, because you can get very nice low gain, mid gain tones, but it very quickly just wants to do what it's best at, and that is just world-ending, apocalyptic high gain. So now that I've tried this, I'm really curious now about how the EL34 version and the OG compares to the 6L6 Stealth. I asked Fluff, he's obviously an expert in the field, and specifically I asked him why he went with the OG and the EL34 Stealth, everyone except the 6L6. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said that the OG isn't as gained out as either Stealth, which makes it more usable in more situations like 90s rock tones, for example. And relative to the 6L6 Stealth, the EL34 version isn't as gained out, so especially on the green and blue channels, the clean is cleaner, you have a more usable tonal range, but the difference between the two stealths wasn't big enough to warrant owning both. That's great insight in lieu of actually hearing them. And actually, my friend Mendel recently made an in-depth video comparing the three. I'll leave a link in the description. You can really hear the differences in that video. So now that I know more about what makes them different, I'm not mad I went with the 6L6 Stealth. I think the high gain tone, which is what I play most of the time anyways, is truly as kick-ass as everyone says it is. And the blacked out front plate, it looks the coolest, big Batman energy, but I think if I were to do it again, I'd probably get the EL34 version just for that extra little bit of versatility. But anyways, that'll do it for me. Here's where I'll throw it to you. EVH amps, 5153 Stealths. What do you guys think? Any and all thoughts? Let me know down below. A massive shout out to my patrons for making each and every video possible. Their names are up on the screen right now. I love you all. If you're enjoying the content and want to directly support what I do, consider joining them. You can also join as a YouTube channel member or pick up some comfy merch. It all goes back into the channel, so I really appreciate it. And of course, I just appreciate you guys being here and watching the videos. Social media, Discord, and links to all the gear are in the description. As always, thank you so much for watching. You've been awesome, and I will see you for the next video.